Hi guys, and welcome to the second video of our revision series on early Christian Ireland. So we're going to be looking at keywords, places and people. The keywords we're going to be looking at today are tonsure, habit, an oratory, a refectory, a scriptorium, cells, alms, an Abbots House, a guest house, a graveyard, a round tower, a high stone cross, and the daily prayers of Lauds, Matins and Vespers. The first two words we're going to be looking at are tonsure and habit. So a tonsure is a special type of haircut, as you can see here from the arrow, that the monk would have had. The habit is the type of cloak they wore, and it usually would have been brown. So monks wore brown cloaks known as habits, and when someone joined a monastery, their hair was cut in this particular fashion as a tonsure, as a sign of their religious devotion, because who would want to walk around with that haircut unless you were devoted to the religion? Our next keyword is an oratory. So the oratory was the main church of the monastery. So within the monastery, there's a group of buildings, and the main church within it is known as the oratory. As you can see from the picture here, it's an arrow pointing into that, the largest of the buildings other than that giant round tower, and that would have been the oratory. This little diagram here is the diagram we're going to be using to show the other buildings of the monastery. The first building on this map we're going to look at is the refectory. So the refectory was where monks ate their meals. You can see from the map there, it's kind of a big building. So they come in there and this is where they eat their meals. When I was growing up, the school I was in, the cafeteria was known as the ref, after this, the refectory. Next building is the Scriptorium. So this is where the monks made manuscripts, and we're going to be looking at manuscripts in a bit more detail in a later video. But Scriptorium would have been a smallish kind of room where they made these amazing manuscripts like the Book of Kells. The next word we're looking at is cells. So cells were the wooden huts where the monks would sleep. Now we looked in the last video at beehive huts, and they would have been cells as well. So it's a small little room that a monk would have had. Maybe one or two monks might have shared the room, and these were small huts, very simple, nothing but a bed in it. The next thing we're going to look at is the Abbots House. So from the last video, we know that an abbot is the head of the monastery. So the abbot is the person in charge of the monastery. He's the head monk, and he generally had a nicer house, which would be distinguishable from the other monks' cells. You also had a guest house. So if you see here number 5 on the thing, it's kind of away from the other buildings. And the guest house would have been for visitors and for pilgrims. So these are the people who went on pilgrimages. Another word we looked at, a pilgrimage, was a journey to a holy place. And as if you were on a pilgrimage, sometimes you might stop off in a local monastery for somewhere to eat, somewhere to sleep, and just for a rest. Also within a monastery you'd find a graveyard. Sometimes the graveyard would be inside the stone walls and sometimes it would be outside the stone walls. As you can see from the picture there, number 1 shows where a stone wall is, and number 2 shows where the oratory or the main church was, and at the back of the main church is the graveyard. Now, sometimes the graveyard would be at the back of the oratory, or sometimes they would keep it outside of the stone walls altogether. One of the most prominent features of that diagram is the round tower. And round towers were used for defence, they were used to store valuables, and they were used to call monks to prayer. Last year on the exam, this question came up, and they were very specific. The examiners were very specific about what they were going to accept as an answer, and it was to store valuables, it was for defence, and it was to call monks to prayer. You see a little diagram of what it looks like on the inside. Now the bottom door would have been elevated up the ground, and you'd put down a little ladder from the inside to get into it. Okay, and then you pull the ladder up if someone's coming to attack and they can't get up at the door. The next thing we're going to look at is high stone crosses. So we're going to be looking in a minute at how much monks prayed and some of the things they did. But one of the things they did was they carved these high stone crosses, and they carved pictures from the Bible into them. So they used these pictures to help people tell the stories of the Bible, because most of the people at the time couldn't read. Remember, the form of writing in Ireland before the Christians came was Om, which, if you can remember, was on the side of a stone where they'd have little markings on the edge of a stone, usually to signify where someone's property began, like this land would belong to somebody. So they think that maybe these stone crosses were coloured and were kind of washed away. The colour has been washed away with the weather throughout the years. But they would have used kind of Celtic kind of influence in the designs as well in their pictures. So here's another close-up of that picture. As you see, in the middle is a picture of Jesus kind of going on the cross. So it's telling people the story of the Bible through pictures. And a lot of these would have been in the monastery as well. So what did the monks do in these fancy monasteries that they had? A massive part of it, as you would imagine, is praying. The monks would have prayed 6 to 8 times a day. They had a prayer at dawn, so it'd be called dawn, and that was known as the Lauds. They had prayers in the morning, which were known as Matins, and the last prayer of the day was called the Vespers. The monasteries would have been self-sufficient. So what I mean by self-sufficient is that they would have grown their own food, and they would have, been able to live off of what they had in their land. So when they weren't praying, they were farming, and they were, just making sure that everyone had enough to eat, that everything was taken care of. Some of them would have been working in the Scriptorium, writing manuscripts. Other monks would have been performing alms. So monks gave alms, which was food and other help to the poor. These monasteries would sometimes just be the centre of a community. And many times they'd be the centre of the community, unless it was a monastery that was in isolation, where they would have their hermit monks. But generally they would be the life force of the community, and they would give food and other help to people who needed it. So to end the show, the keywords we've looked at are the tonsure is the haircut, the habit is what they used, oratory is your main church, refectory where they ate, scriptorium where they made manuscripts, cells were the little houses the monks lived in, alms was given food and other help to the poor, Abbots House was where the head of the church slept, guest house where pilgrims could stay over for a night, graveyard would usually be inside or outside the stone walls of the monastery. Then you have a round tower where they would store valuables, call monks to prayer and for defence. Then you have high stone crosses, which would tell the story of the Bible in these pictures. And then you had your prayers with the Lauds, the Matins and the Vespers.